Hi everyone, Chris Sarra here. Welcome to my blog space. I thought I'd do something different today and just post a video blog in which I could talk to you more directly rather than write things up in the usual way. Before I talk about today's topic, I wanted to just say thanks to all of those people who've logged on and read what we've had to say, and particularly those who've interacted with me, because that's something that I've really enjoyed, and that's something really important for me to be able to keep in touch and stay connected to what's happening in schools and in communities now. In some ways it feels a bit like, I get to run around the country and do all of that sort of stuff. But it's really important. What I value most is being able to connect with people who can let me know what's really going on in schools. So the more that you can log on and interact with me and let me know what's going on, the better I am for that. So I appreciate your efforts to come on, read about what's topical, and offer your insights, which are tremendously valid. So thanks to all of those of you who have logged on. Today I wanted to comment on the COAG report that's just recently come out, which signals some concerns around Year 9 data. But before I go to the Year 9 data, I just wanted to signal that in an overall sense it's been very positive, that if we look at the results from, say, 2008, we've grown in pretty much every area, and we've achieved positive outcomes for Year 3, Year 5 and Year 7, and we've achieved all of the targets. Unfortunately, we have slipped back in Year 9, and this signals some challenges, but it also means we have to understand the fullest context. For instance, if you were to look at the overall Australian population, Year 9 has slipped backwards in that regard anyway. That's not to say that it's okay that Indigenous students would slip behind, but we've got to understand the fullest context of what's going on here. One of the other things that can bring the data down is the fact that more Indigenous Year 9 students might be becoming more engaged in schooling, which is a positive thing, but it can have an effect in that it drags down the data. So there are all sorts of different angles at which we need to understand and appreciate the data. And as I've said in other places, politicians and bureaucrats can be of assistance here by not over-reading the data that's provided by NAPLAN and on my school website and all of those kinds of things. I was a strong supporter of all of those mechanisms, and I continue to be, but it becomes problematic if we attach too much importance to what the information provides us, because after all it's just a point in time kind of reference. So we need to understand that. And we need to not be seduced by the kind of potential to overread what the data is saying. So step back, understand it in its fullest context. The challenge for secondary schools, though, clearly is around Year 9 and engaging. And again, I make this point, I wouldn't like us as educators, particularly in secondary schools, to go down and make the same mistakes that were made in America and be seduced by a situation in which we think that as educators we can make the data appear better by excluding particular kids who we don't think would do well, by excluding those sorts of kids from the test. This is a terrible kind of circumstance to get seduced by, and it's one that lacks integrity. So we have to actively avoid being caught in that situation, and we've got to aspire to get as many kids to participate in the NAPLAN test and those sorts of mechanisms to make it much more meaningful. Now, of course, that means it's going to create challenges for data, and this is what I mean by not over-reading it or not placing too much importance on it. So if we want to be a system that has integrity, we've got to make sure that we can get as many children participating in that data so that we can get a true sense of feedback about the things that we need to know. So on that note, what's really positive about all of this is that we actually do know where some problem areas are and where we need to work harder on. If I can take you back to the Year 9 stuff more specifically, it's interesting to think about what that actually means. For instance, in literacy, for Year 9 students, and I'm an ex-secondary English teacher, it's really hard work trying to engage adolescent kids with hormones bouncing all over their body in active kind of literacy and English and all of those sorts of processes. So we've got to work harder to make it more meaningful. We've got to find ways to make the lessons more engaging, obviously, and that can happen in all sorts of ways. For secondary teachers, I think part of the challenge is getting young Indigenous kids to understand that good literacy outcomes means embracing opportunities to transcend into a positive future. For kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, it means if we can do well at literacy, then there's an opportunity to transcend the circumstances and the challenges that we might find ourselves in. So it wouldn't hurt, I don't think, to have these kind of meta conversations with young Indigenous kids and young kids in any situation about the importance of schooling. For young black kids, it is a bit more specific. You know, when I was at Cherbourg, I used to say to kids, if you can write and you can write well, if you can read and you can read well, that's power. And if you can write well, that's even more power. So if we want to be uncontrollable, you know, we're not going to be uncontrollable by disengaging from school and running amok in our communities, because the truth is, if we engage in that sort of behaviour, then we're very controllable. So young kids have to understand that if we want to be uncontrollable, then the way that we become uncontrollable is to become stronger, smarter, become better at literacy, better at numeracy, and be able to write, and write with power. So uncontrollable in a disengaging and delinquent kind of sense is not actually as uncontrollable as young kids might think, because the truth is the system can close in around them and eventually they'll end up in a small place and they're very controlled. So what we've got to do is get young kids to understand that if they want to be uncontrollable, then they've got to build something in here and build something up here. To be able to read adequately, to be able to write powerfully. That's what we've got to get kids to understand, what being uncontrollable means. Of course, it means we should be determined to revise, to respond to the data and revise what we're doing in a technical sense, and think about whether or not we need to be changing our methods. We certainly need to be revising our curriculum and the sorts of books that we want kids to engage in. Understanding that literacy is not just about what happens in secondary English, it happens right across the curriculum. And so in secondary schools we have to come to grips with those sorts of challenges, and we can't just blame the primary schools because something hasn't been done back there. When we get kids through the school gate, that's what we have to work with. We've got to shape and respond to what they bring. So let me finish by just saying that in an overall sense, yes, there are some challenges, but yes, isn't it fantastic that we know what we have to do, that this is measured. It's not impossible, we can do this. And so I urge you to keep at it. It is hard work, as we've said all along, but we can do this. Thanks for joining in.